Scene inside a quiet hospital room late at night. Jimin is standing near the side of the hospital bed while Jungkook faces him with an intense, frustrated expression. The atmosphere is unusually tense despite the sterile and peaceful hospital surroundings. Jimin looks emotionally exhausted, as if he has been trying to explain something important for a long time, while Jungkook appears unable to control his anger. Keep physical distance between them and emphasize their expressions rather than violence. Soft hospital lights illuminate their faces while the corridor outside remains dim. Use dramatic shadows, realistic hospital equipment, cinematic depth of field, emotional K-drama composition, and a sense that something terrible is about to happen. The viewer should immediately wonder what caused Jungkook to become so angry with Jimin. The room had been quiet only moments earlier. Then one argument changed everything. Jimin tried to explain, but Jungkook was already too angry to listen. Show Jimin standing beside the hospital bed, raising one hand slightly as if asking Jungkook to calm down. His face should show exhaustion, fear, and sadness rather than anger. Jungkook stands several steps away, visibly frustrated and struggling to control his emotions. The hospital room should contain realistic medical equipment, a chair, bedside table, monitor, and softly glowing overhead lights. Create a cinematic composition where Jimin appears vulnerable while Jungkook looks conflicted. Use cool hospital lighting mixed with warmer light from the hallway. The viewer should feel that this argument is connected to something much deeper than what is being said aloud. Make the scene suspenseful enough to encourage viewers to continue to the next image. Please, Jungkook. Just listen to me. Jimin's voice was quiet. But Jungkook was too overwhelmed by everything he had heard. Scene where the emotional argument becomes more intense. Jungkook stands near the foot of the hospital bed with clenched fists and a deeply frustrated expression, while Jimin looks toward him with disbelief and sadness. No physical violence should occur in this image. Instead, focus on the dangerous emotional tension immediately before a mistake is made. The room feels smaller because of the silence between them. A heart monitor glows softly in the background, while the hallway outside is empty. Use dramatic close-up framing, realistic facial expressions, cinematic shadows, shallow depth of field, and a suspenseful K-drama atmosphere. The scene should make viewers feel that Jungkook is about to cross a line he will regret. Story text. Jungkook's voice grew louder. Jimin stopped arguing. Somewhere inside him, he realized that something was about to go terribly wrong. Scene capturing the instant Jungkook loses control and accidentally lashes out at Jimin in the hospital room. Keep the action non-graphic and non-injurious, focusing on the shock and emotional reaction rather than physical impact. Jimin suddenly loses his balance and reaches toward the hospital bed for support. Jungkook's expression should immediately shift from anger to stunned realization. The hospital monitor and surrounding equipment remain visible, adding realism and tension. Use cinematic motion, dramatic lighting, frozen emotional expressions, and strong visual storytelling. The image should communicate that Jungkook instantly realizes he has gone too far and that Jimin is not responding normally. It happened in a single terrible moment. The anger disappeared from Jungkook's face almost instantly, but it was already too late. Show Jimin suddenly becoming unsteady beside the hospital bed, one hand gripping the edge of the mattress while his other hand reaches toward the wall for support. His face is pale and confused, his eyes struggling to focus. Jungkook stands only a few steps away, frozen in shock, his anger completely gone. The hospital monitor in the background begins showing a noticeable change without displaying graphic medical information. Create a cinematic close-up emphasizing Jimin's weakened expression and Jungkook's horrified reaction. Use cool lighting, realistic hospital details, subtle motion blur, dramatic shadows, and a suspenseful atmosphere. The viewer should immediately wonder whether Jimin was already unwell before the argument began. Jimin. Jungkook whispered. Jimin tried to answer, but his voice never came. Hospital scene where Jimin collapses beside the bed, with Jungkook immediately reaching toward him in panic. Keep the collapse non-graphic and avoid showing injury or blood. The focus should be on Jungkook's sudden transformation from anger to terror. Jimin's eyes are closed and his body is supported safely by the bed and Jungkook. Hospital equipment surrounds them, while the room suddenly feels chaotic despite the quiet setting. Use cinematic lighting, realistic body language, dramatic perspective, subtle motion blur, and intense emotional facial expressions. The scene should look like a major turning point in a television drama, leaving viewers desperate to know what happens next. 5 seconds earlier, they had been arguing. Now Jimin was unconscious, and Jungkook could barely breathe. Show Jungkook kneeling beside the hospital bed, desperately calling Jimin's name while trying to remain calm. His face is filled with fear, regret, and disbelief. Jimin remains unconscious but safely positioned on the bed as hospital staff begin entering the room in the background. A nurse reaches toward the medical equipment while another staff member approaches the bedside. Keep the scene non-graphic and medically respectful. Use dramatic hospital lighting, cinematic depth of field, realistic expressions, and a sense of urgency. The main focus should remain on Jungkook's terrified face, showing how quickly anger has transformed into overwhelming fear. "Jimin, please wake up." Jungkook kept repeating his name. For the first time that night, his voice sounded completely broken. Emergency scene inside the hospital room as medical staff rush in after hearing the commotion. Jungkook is moved slightly away from the bedside but remains frozen nearby, watching anxiously. Jimin lies unconscious on the hospital bed while the medical team calmly begins assessing him. The scene should remain non-graphic, focusing on urgency, emotion, and realistic hospital procedures. Use cool fluorescent lighting, dramatic shadows, controlled motion blur, detailed medical equipment, and a cinematic K-drama visual style. Jungkook's face should clearly communicate guilt and fear as he realizes the seriousness of what has happened. The door suddenly opened. Nurses rushed inside, and Jungkook stepped backward. He had never felt so helpless. Show Jungkook standing outside the hospital room while medical staff attend to Jimin behind a partially closed door. Jungkook's hands are trembling, his clothes slightly disheveled from the chaotic moment, and his eyes remain fixed on the room. A nurse briefly closes the door, leaving Jungkook alone in the corridor. Use a long hallway perspective, cold hospital lighting, reflections on the polished floor, and cinematic depth of field. His expression should reveal growing panic and regret. The viewer should feel the unbearable silence after the chaos and wonder whether Jimin will wake up. The door closed between them. Jungkook could no longer see Jimin. All he could do was wait. Close-up of Jungkook sitting alone on a hospital corridor chair, staring at the floor. His expression is distant and terrified, while his hands are tightly clasped together. The hallway is nearly empty, with only distant hospital staff moving in the background. A wall clock should be visible, subtly emphasizing the passing time. Use cool blue-white hospital lighting, shallow depth of field, realistic emotional detail, and a quiet psychological drama atmosphere. The image should feel like the beginning of Jungkook's emotional breakdown as the reality of his actions begins to sink in. 1 minute had passed. It felt like an hour. Jungkook kept replaying the moment in his head. Show Jungkook standing abruptly in the corridor after hearing a faint sound from inside Jimin's room. His expression immediately changes from sadness to fear. He looks toward the closed door as if desperately hoping someone will come out with good news. A hospital monitor sound can be suggested visually through the equipment visible behind the glass, but do not include alarming medical details. Use dramatic perspective from behind Jungkook, with the hospital room framed at the end of the corridor. Cinematic lighting and deep shadows should make the hallway feel longer and more isolated. 2 minutes had passed. Then Jungkook heard something from inside the room, and his heart nearly stopped. Create an emotional scene where a nurse briefly steps into the corridor and speaks calmly to Jungkook. Jungkook looks desperate for information, his eyes red and his face filled with anxiety. The nurse remains professional and reassuring, while the hospital room behind her is partially visible. Keep medical information vague and avoid unrealistic details. Use cinematic framing, realistic hospital lighting, emotional facial expressions, and a quiet suspenseful atmosphere. Jungkook should look as though he is trying to understand whether Jimin is safe but is terrified of hearing the answer. "He's being taken care of," the nurse said. Those words should have comforted Jungkook. Somehow, they only made him realize how serious the situation had become. Show Jungkook sitting alone again, this time with his head lowered and tears beginning to form in his eyes. His hands cover part of his face as he struggles to breathe steadily. The corridor lights reflect softly across the polished floor. In the background, the closed hospital door remains visible. Use an intimate cinematic close-up, realistic tearful expression, subtle shadows, shallow depth of field, and a deeply emotional K-drama atmosphere. The scene should communicate that Jungkook is no longer thinking about the argument, he is thinking only about the moment he lost control. 4 minutes had passed. Jungkook finally understood the truth, being angry for a moment could never justify what he had done. The emotional climax of the first sequence. Exactly 5 minutes after Jimin collapsed, Jungkook sits outside the hospital room and suddenly breaks down in tears. His shoulders shake as he covers his face with both hands, unable to stop crying. His expression should show overwhelming guilt, fear, regret, and love as a fictional dramatic emotion, without romanticizing the harmful action. The corridor is quiet around him, making his emotional breakdown feel even more powerful. Use cinematic lighting, realistic tears, shallow depth of field, dramatic shadows, and a heartbreaking K-drama composition. 5 minutes later, Jungkook couldn't stop crying. The anger was gone. All that remained was regret. Show Jungkook standing outside Jimin's hospital room, crying quietly while whispering an apology toward the closed door. He places one hand against the door but does not enter. His face is devastated, and his eyes are red from crying. The hallway is softly illuminated, while the room behind the door remains hidden. Use cinematic close-up framing, emotional realism, dramatic shadows, and a quiet atmosphere. Make the viewer feel the weight of an apology that may come too late. "I'm sorry, Jimin." Jungkook whispered the words again and again. A tense fictional hospital corridor scene where a doctor finally walks toward Jungkook. Jungkook immediately stands, wiping his tears and looking desperate for an answer. The doctor has a serious but calm expression and holds a medical chart. Do not display specific medical information. Use cinematic hospital lighting, a long corridor perspective, realistic body language, and dramatic facial expressions. Jungkook should appear terrified of what the doctor is about to say. The scene should feel like the moment before a major revelation. When the doctor finally approached, Jungkook stood so quickly that his chair nearly fell behind him. "How is he?" Jungkook listening to the doctor with a devastated expression. The doctor speaks calmly while Jungkook's eyes fill with fresh tears. Keep the medical explanation intentionally unclear so the mystery remains focused on Jimin's condition and the emotional consequences. The hospital room door remains visible in the background. Use cinematic close-up framing, soft hospital lighting, realistic expressions, and restrained emotional intensity. Jungkook should look as though every word from the doctor is becoming heavier and heavier. The doctor's words were calm, but Jungkook barely heard them. He could only think about one thing: Jimin had been struggling before tonight, and he had made everything worse. Style cinematic composition revealing that Jimin had previously hidden signs of emotional exhaustion. Show Jimin sitting alone in the same hospital room earlier that day, quietly looking at his phone and hiding his sadness whenever someone enters. In the present timeline, Jungkook stands outside the room unaware of how much Jimin had been carrying. Use subtle visual contrast between past and present, warm and cool lighting, cinematic depth, realistic expressions, and emotional storytelling. The image should suggest that the collapse was not simply caused by one argument. Jungkook didn't know that Jimin had been carrying a secret for days. Tonight's argument had only pushed an already fragile situation beyond its limit. Jimin's phone resting on a small hospital bedside table. The screen displays an unsent message without making the actual text readable. The phone is surrounded by ordinary personal belongings, creating a quiet and intimate atmosphere. In the background, Jimin is visible resting on the hospital bed, still unconscious but safely monitored. Use soft cinematic lighting, shallow depth of field, realistic hospital details, and a mysterious emotional tone. The unsent message should become an important visual clue that makes viewers wonder what Jimin had wanted to tell Jungkook before everything happened. There was a message Jimin had written but never sent. And it contained something Jungkook had never been told. Where a nurse carefully brings Jimin's phone to Jungkook. Jungkook looks at the device with hesitation and fear, unsure whether he has the right to look at it. The phone screen remains partially visible but the message itself is unreadable. His expression shows conflict between wanting answers and respecting Jimin's privacy. Use cinematic close-up framing, soft hospital lighting, realistic hands and facial expressions, and an emotionally suspenseful atmosphere. The viewer should feel that the phone contains a secret capable of changing Jungkook's understanding of everything. The phone was in his hands. For the first time, Jungkook realized that the truth might hurt even more than uncertainty. Jungkook staring at the phone screen with tears in his eyes. The screen should contain several blurred lines suggesting a long unsent message, but no readable text. Jungkook's face should reflect shock and sadness as he realizes Jimin had been trying to communicate something important. The hospital room remains quiet behind him. Use the phone glow as a subtle light source across Jungkook's face, dramatic shadows, shallow depth of field, realistic emotional details, and cinematic K-drama atmosphere. Jimin had been trying to say something long before their argument. Jungkook just never gave him the chance to finish. Jungkook sitting beside the hospital corridor window, silently crying. The city lights outside are blurred into soft reflections across the glass. His expression shows deep remorse rather than anger. One hand covers his eyes while the other holds the phone carefully. Use cinematic nighttime lighting, realistic tears, subtle shadows, shallow depth of field, and a melancholic drama atmosphere. The image should visually represent Jungkook confronting the consequences of losing control and realizing that apologies cannot erase what happened. For the first time, Jungkook stopped asking why Jimin had kept secrets. He only asked himself why he hadn't listened. A hopeful but emotionally tense fictional hospital scene where Jimin slowly begins to regain consciousness. His eyes are barely open while soft hospital light falls across his face. A medical professional remains nearby, ensuring he is safely monitored. Jungkook is not yet inside the room, creating suspense about whether he will be allowed to see Jimin. Keep the scene non-graphic and medically respectful. Use soft cinematic lighting, realistic hospital details, emotional facial expressions, and a quiet atmosphere that contrasts with the chaos of the earlier scenes. Inside the room, Jimin finally moved. His eyes slowly opened. But the first name he whispered was not what anyone expected. Jimin awake but visibly weak and confused in the hospital bed. A nurse stands nearby while Jimin looks toward the door with a worried expression. His lips appear to form a question, and his eyes search the room as if looking for someone important. Keep the scene emotionally focused without showing medical distress. Use soft hospital lighting, cinematic close-up, realistic facial details, shallow depth of field, and a gentle but suspenseful atmosphere. The viewer should immediately wonder whether Jimin is angry with Jungkook or secretly worried about him. When Jimin finally woke up, he didn't ask what had happened. His first question was simple: where is Jungkook? Hallway scene where Jungkook stands outside Jimin's hospital room with his hand hovering near the door handle. His eyes are red from crying, and his face shows fear and hesitation. He desperately wants to see Jimin but is terrified that Jimin may not want him there. The door is slightly open, allowing a small amount of warm light from the room to spill into the dark corridor. Use dramatic lighting, realistic emotional body language, shallow depth of field, and a strong sense of anticipation. Jungkook had wanted to see Jimin for hours. Now that he finally could, he was terrified to open the door. A deeply emotional fictional hospital scene where Jungkook slowly enters the room and Jimin looks toward him from the hospital bed. Their eyes meet for the first time since the collapse. Jungkook immediately begins crying again, while Jimin looks exhausted, confused, and emotional. Keep a respectful distance between them and focus entirely on facial expressions and atmosphere. Use warm bedside lighting contrasting with the cool hallway behind Jungkook, cinematic depth of field, realistic hospital details, and a powerful K-drama composition. The moment their eyes met, Jungkook broke down again. Jimin said nothing. Somehow, that silence hurt more than any accusation could have. Jungkook standing beside Jimin's hospital bed, visibly crying as he apologizes. Jimin watches him quietly, his expression difficult to read. Jungkook keeps his hands to himself and gives Jimin space, emphasizing remorse and respect rather than physical contact. The room is softly illuminated by bedside lights, while the hospital monitor and medical equipment remain subtly visible in the background. Use realistic emotional expressions, cinematic lighting, shallow depth of field, and a restrained dramatic atmosphere. "I'm sorry," Jungkook whispered. "I should have listened. I should never have let my anger control me." An emotionally complex fictional hospital scene where Jimin looks at Jungkook after hearing his apology. Instead of anger, his expression shows sadness, exhaustion, and complicated emotion. Jungkook looks surprised because he expected rejection. Jimin slowly reaches toward the bedside table, where his phone and the mysterious unsent message remain. Use soft cinematic lighting, realistic facial expressions, detailed hospital surroundings, and emotional K-drama composition. The scene should suggest that Jimin still has something important to reveal. Jungkook expected Jimin to push him away. Instead, Jimin quietly said, "There's something you still don't know." A suspenseful fictional hospital scene where Jimin looks directly at Jungkook and prepares to reveal the truth behind everything that happened. Jungkook sits beside the bed, listening carefully with tears still visible in his eyes. Jimin's phone lies between them, showing the blurred unsent message. The lighting becomes slightly darker around the edges of the room, creating a visual sense that a major secret is about to be revealed. Use cinematic close-up framing, realistic expressions, dramatic shadows, shallow depth of field, and emotional thriller aesthetics. "What happened tonight wasn't the whole story," Jimin whispered. Jungkook stared at him. "Then tell me everything." The final cinematic cliffhanger of the fictional drama inside the hospital room. Jimin lies safely in the hospital bed, looking emotionally exhausted but determined to finally tell the truth. Jungkook sits beside him with tearful eyes, listening carefully. On the bedside table, Jimin's phone displays a mysterious unsent message, while a second notification suddenly appears. Both characters look toward the phone in shock. Do not make the notification readable. Through the glass of the hospital door, a mysterious silhouette can be seen standing in the hallway, watching them from a distance. Use dramatic hospital lighting, strong cinematic shadows, realistic facial expressions, shallow depth of field, suspenseful K-drama atmosphere, and a powerful final composition. The image should leave the audience asking who sent the new message, why Jimin had been hiding the truth, and whether the collapse was connected to something much bigger than their argument. Jungkook thought the worst moment of the night had already passed. Then the phone received one more message. Jimin looked at the screen, and his face suddenly went pale. "Kook, we need to leave. Now."